A warm welcome to another episode of SciencePunk Explains the Frame Budget Approach.
So, let's just start with the big question for today. What would we actually gain if we started to read biological aging not as elapsed time, but as tracked, irreversible development? In other words, what if we treated it more like a ledger than a calendar?
Alright, so if you were with us for our last explainer, you'll remember we introduced this core concept from the FBA's physics, the irreversible contribution. It's basically any change to a system that you just can't easily undo. It's a one-way street.
Well, today we're taking that idea out of the relatively clean world of physics and throwing it into a whole new, much more complex territory, biology. We're going to really stress test it and see if this operational idea has any real power when you apply it to a living thing. So here's our roadmap. We'll start with this new frontier. Then we'll dig into our main analogy, the ledger, not the calendar. From there, we'll explore what life's one-way paths really means, and then cover this really cool concept of aging as path burial. And finally, we'll get to the bottom line.
Okay, let's dive in. But first, let's be really clear about something. We are not trying to reduce all of biology down to physics. That is not the point. Instead, we're just using biological aging as a test case, to see if the frame budget approach can offer a new, maybe clearer way to describe what's happening.
And that brings us right to the heart of today's explainer, this new way to think about aging. It's a really powerful mental model that asks us to shift our whole point of view. So let's compare the old way with this new FBA alternative.
Okay, so on one hand, you have the standard calendar view. The focus is just on elapsed time. The only question is, how long has it been? Aging is just a clock ticking. But the ledger view asks a totally different question. What has been spent that can't be recovered? Here, aging isn't a clock. It's a running balance of those irreversible contributions we've been talking about.
And this quote really just nails it. Aging is the integrated irreversibility. It's the part of the internal accounting that you can't just turn back for free. So aging stops being this mysterious force and becomes something you can actually account for, an entry in the ledger that can't be erased.
Now, to really get this ledger idea, we have to think about how biological development works. It is all about paths. An organism's history, your history, my history, it matters. Development is all about navigating these branching and often one-way paths. And here's what's so cool. Development is so robust because it doesn't depend on one single perfect path. Instead, it relies on what the FBA calls a path bundle, a whole family of slightly different microscopic journeys that all lead to more or less the same result. It's this redundancy that makes life so resilient. Evolution is the perfect example of this on a massive scale. Think about a dolphin. It looks like a fish, right? But it didn't reverse its evolution to become a fish again. No, its ancestors were land mammals. It found a totally new, completely irreversible path back to the water. And that unique path is forever inscribed in its biology. So, if development is a journey down these one-way paths, what happens to all the paths we leave behind, or the ones we never took in the first place? Well, this is where the FBA introduces this fascinating idea of path burial.
I mean, it makes intuitive sense. The more a system develops, the harder it is to perfectly reconstruct an earlier state. But how do we describe that in a formal, operational way? How do we talk about this decreasing accessibility to the past?
The FBA's answer is this concept, path burial. Just think of it this way. With every developmental step you take, the road back to your exact past gets a little fainter. The options for returning to that old state just get thinner and more fragile until they are basically buried under all the new changes.
And this is really important. The FBA is being very intellectually honest here. Path burial is not being presented as some new law of nature. It's a descriptive tool. It's a controlled way of talking about a growing asymmetry. The simple fact that it's way easier to move forward into many possible futures than it is to reconstruct one specific past.
And hey, this isn't just a nice metaphor. The FBA actually ties this idea directly to its bookkeeping. This formula might look a little technical, but the idea is pretty straightforward. It basically adds up all the small, irreversible changes over a system's entire lifeline. The result is a specific, calculated aging score that's totally independent of a clock.
Okay, so let's pull all this together. What's the real takeaway here? And why does this shift from a calendar to a ledger actually matter?
First, let's be crystal clear about what this is not. This is not a new medical therapy for aging. It is not an attempt to reduce biology to physics. It is not a claim that it's logically impossible to return to a past state. And it's not a complete theory of aging. It's a framework for description and accounting. That's it.
So here are the 3 crucial points to take away. 1. Aging can be seen as accumulated, irreversible development, not just elapsed time. 2. This irreversibility can be described as path burial, that thinning of accessible return paths. And 3. This gives us a new, operational way to track and account for aging, completely distinct from a simple calendar.
But if aging really is a ledger, a kind of accounting of irreversible spending, that leads to one absolutely critical question. What are the currencies we're tracking? What are we actually spending? Because any good accountant will tell you, you can't just write stuff was spent in the books. You need to track specific, well-defined quantities. So to make this ledger view of aging really useful, we have to get really clear about the budgets we're tracking.
And that sets up our next episode perfectly. We're going to dive into the 3 big candidates for our ledger's currencies: energy, entropy, and information. And we're going to ask, are these 3 separate budgets, or just 3 different perspectives on the same fundamental process? Bye for now, until the next episode, and stay curious.